There comes a moment in every parent's life when you realize the world has grown harder than it was in your day. For Samuel Yoder, that moment arrived on a cold November morning when he found a 7-year-old girl digging through a gas station dumpster, her tiny fingers blue with frost. She looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much, whispering words that would change everything. "Mister, I'm hungry." In that instant, Samuel faced a choice that would test everything he believed about faith, community, and what it truly means to love thy neighbor. His Amish community had always lived apart from the world's troubles, but sometimes trouble finds you anyway. What started as one man's simple act of kindness would soon divide his peaceful community and force them all to confront a question that goes to the heart of their beliefs. When compassion conflicts with tradition, which path does God truly want us to walk? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hand-carved wooden cross above Samuel Yoder's kitchen table had witnessed 47 years of family meals, prayers, and quiet conversations. His grandfather had crafted it from oak felled on their own land, and Samuel's late wife Martha had polished it every Sunday morning before church. Now, 3 years after her passing, it seemed to watch over him with the same gentle patience she once had. Samuel traced his weathered fingers along the cross's smooth surface as he finished his morning coffee. At 52, he carried himself with the steady bearing of a man who'd spent his life working the land. His beard, once dark brown like rich soil, now showed streaks of silver that caught the early morning light filtering through the kitchen. A window. The laugh lines around his eyes had deepened since Martha's death, not from joy, but from the weight of carrying on alone. The farmhouse felt too large for one man. Every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the old mantel clock seemed amplified in the silence. Samuel had grown accustomed to talking to Martha's memory as he moved through his daily routines, sharing thoughts about the weather, the crops, the small concerns that make up a farmer's life. Sometimes he caught himself setting 2 places at the table before remembering. His 3 children, all grown and married with families of their own, lived in distant Amish communities. They visited when they could, but Samuel understood. Young families had their own struggles, their own paths to walk. He'd raised them to be independent, to trust in God's providence, and they were living those lessons well. Still, the quiet evenings stretched long, and he often found himself wondering if this solitude was part of God's plan or simply the natural order of aging. The morning routine never varied. Samuel rose before dawn, milked his small herd of Holstein. The cows collected eggs from the chicken coop and tended to the horses. The physical work grounded him, reminded him of his place in the cycle of seasons and growing things. His hands, calloused from decades of labor, moved with practiced efficiency through tasks that Martha used to help him complete. She'd been his partner in everything: farming, child-rearing, faith. After chores, Samuel often walked the perimeter of his 100-acre farm. The land had been in his family for 4 generations, passed down from father to son, with the understanding that it was merely borrowed from the Almighty. Each field held memories. The corner where he'd taught his oldest son to plow. The apple orchard he and Martha had planted their first year of marriage. The meadow where they'd picnicked with the children on summer evenings. The Amish community of Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, numbered just over 300 souls. They lived simply as their ancestors had for centuries, rejecting the complexities and temptations of the modern world. Samuel served as a deacon in their church district, a role that required him to visit families in need, counsel those facing difficulties, and help maintain the spiritual health of the community. His neighbor, Ruth Byler, often worried about his isolation. A widow herself, she understood the particular loneliness that comes with losing a life partner. Ruth had been Martha's closest friend, and she'd appointed herself as Samuel's informal guardian, bringing him meals when she sensed he wasn't eating properly, inviting him to family gatherings, gently suggesting that perhaps it was time to consider remarriage. "God doesn't intend for us to walk through life alone, Samuel," she'd said just last week, her kind eyes filled with genuine concern. "There are good women in neighboring districts who would make fine wives." Samuel always thanked her for her concern, but deflected the conversation. He wasn't ready, might never be ready, to open his heart to someone new. Martha had been his other half, the one person who understood his moods, his fears, his dreams. The thought of trying to build that kind of intimacy with someone else felt like a betrayal of their love. Bishop Eli Miller, the spiritual leader of their district, had also expressed concern about Samuel's withdrawn state. During their monthly visits, the bishop spoke gently about the importance of community, of not allowing grief to isolate oneself from God's people. Samuel listened respectfully, nodded at the appropriate moments, and continued living much as he had since Martha's passing. The truth was, Samuel's faith had become more complex in his solitude. He still attended church services, participated in community work days, and fulfilled his duties as deacon. But in the quiet hours of evening, he found himself questioning aspects of their traditions that he'd never examined before. When Martha was alive, their shared belief had been enough. Now alone with his thoughts, he wondered about the rigid boundaries their community maintained with the outside world. Sometimes, driving his horse and buggy past Englisher children waiting for school buses, he wondered what it would be like to live without the constant awareness of being separate, different, watched. He'd see young mothers in town, clearly struggling with multiple children and heavy burdens, and he'd want to help. But the invisible barriers of their different worlds held him back. These weren't doubts about God exactly. Samuel's faith in the Almighty remained strong. But he increasingly wondered if some of their community's interpretations of God's will might be too narrow, too focused on maintaining tradition rather than expressing love. Martha had always been the more progressive of the two, quietly questioning why helping their English neighbors might be seen as getting too involved with the world. The morning that would change everything started like all the others. Samuel completed his chores as the November sun climbed over the bare fields. The harvest was finished, the animals settled for winter. It would be a quiet season, time for repairs, planning, reflection. He hitched up his horse and buggy for the weekly trip to town for supplies. The drive to Millfield took 40 minutes along country roads that wound past other Amish farms and through patches of woodland where deer often grazed. Samuel enjoyed these solitary journeys, the rhythmic clop of horse hooves on pavement, the familiar landmarks that marked the passage of seasons and years. The outside world crept closer to their community each year. New housing developments, more traffic, the constant hum of progress, but these back roads still felt timeless. In town, Samuel followed his usual pattern: hardware store for animal feed and farm supplies, grocery store for staples Martha used to select herself, and a brief stop at the post office. The English townspeople were polite, but kept their distance, respecting the invisible boundaries that separated their worlds. Samuel had grown comfortable with this arrangement, though he sometimes missed the easy friendships he'd had with English neighbors in his younger days, before community expectations had grown stricter. It was at the gas station on the edge of town, a place he rarely stopped, that Samuel's carefully ordered world began to unravel. He'd pulled in only because his horse needed water from the trough the owner kept for Amish travelers. As he guided the mare to drink, a movement near the dumpster caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a stray cat or small dog. But as he looked closer, his heart constricted. A tiny figure crouched behind the metal container, wearing clothes far too thin for the November cold. The child, he could see now it was a little girl, had her small hands buried in garbage, searching for something. Samuel approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. As she looked up, he saw a face that would haunt his dreams and change his life. She was perhaps 7 years old, with tangled blonde hair and enormous blue eyes that held far too much wariness for a child. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her exposed arms mottled with cold. "Mister, I'm hungry," she whispered, the words barely audible. In that moment, standing in a gas station parking lot with a dumpster between them, Samuel Yoder felt the foundations of his carefully constructed world begin to shift. Every instinct as a father, every lesson about Christian charity his parents had taught him, every memory of Martha's compassionate heart, all of it crystallized into a single, clear understanding. This child needed help. Everything else, community. Expectations, proper procedures, the complicated questions about getting involved with English problems, all of that faded into background noise. What remained was simple, immediate, and undeniable. A hungry child and a man who had the means to feed her. Samuel knelt down to the little girl's level, his voice gentle. "What's your name, child?" She studied his face for a long moment, taking in his plain clothes, his beard, his patient demeanor. "Maya," she whispered finally. "Well, Maya, I think we can do something about that hunger. Would you like to come home with me for a warm meal?" Said, question that would divide his community and test his faith had been asked. As Maya nodded and took his outstretched hand with her small, cold fingers, Samuel Yoder stepped across a line he'd never thought he'd cross, into territory where the rules weren't clear and the consequences couldn't be predicted. The police report would later describe Maya Johnson as a missing minor, endangered. But sitting at Samuel's kitchen table, wrapped in one of Martha's old quilts, she was simply a hungry child eating scrambled eggs with the desperate intensity of someone who didn't know when the next meal might come. Samuel watched her eat, his heart breaking with each careful bite. She held the fork awkwardly, as if fine motor skills were still developing or perhaps forgotten through neglect. When he'd offered her milk, she'd stared at the glass for a long moment before drinking it down in one continuous gulp, then looking up hopefully for more. "How long has it been since you had a real meal, Maya?" he asked gently. She held up 3 fingers, then seemed to reconsider. "Days, maybe more. The lady at the shelter said we had to leave because Mama didn't come back." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than abandonment. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he refilled her milk glass. In his 52 years, he'd seen poverty and hardship within his own community. But this level of neglect, a 7-year-old child fending for herself, was beyond his experience. "Where is your mama now, sweetheart?" Maya's eyes dropped to her plate. "She went to heaven. That's what the policeman said. He said the bad medicine made her go to sleep forever." The clinical way she repeated these words suggested she'd heard them many times but hadn't fully processed their meaning. The full weight of the situation settled on Samuel's shoulders. This wasn't a temporarily lost child who could be quickly reunited with worried parents. Maya was truly alone in the world, caught in a system that had somehow failed to protect her. The responsible thing would be to call the authorities immediately, ensure she was returned to proper care. But as he watched her eat, the way she kept one arm protectively around her plate, the way she glanced toward the door as if ready to run, Samuel found himself hesitating. What if the proper care had been what led her to digging through garbage for food? "Maya, tell me about where you were staying before," he said softly, her small face scrunched with concentration. "Foster lady was nice at first, had other kids. But then she got mad because I had bad dreams and cried at night, said I was too much trouble." Maya took another careful bite of eggs. So I left before they could send me away again." Samuel closed, his eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer for wisdom. A 7-year-old child had concluded that living on the streets was preferable to whatever alternatives she'd been offered. The failure of multiple systems, child services, foster care, community support, had led to this moment in his kitchen. "You don't have to go anywhere right now," he heard himself saying. "You're safe here." Maya looked up at him with those two old eyes. "You won't call the policeman?" The question hung in the air between them. Samuel knew what his community would expect, what the law required, what the sensible course of action would be. But looking at this fragile child who'd been failed by every adult who should have protected her, he found those expectations suddenly meaningless. "Not today," he said finally. "Today you rest and eat and get warm." After Maya finished eating, Samuel showed her to the small bathroom off the kitchen. He'd laid out clean clothes, a simple dress that had belonged to his youngest daughter years ago, along with warm socks and a sweater Martha had knitted. When Maya emerged, transformed from a dirty waif into a properly clothed little girl, the sight nearly brought tears to his eyes. "I look different," she said, studying her reflection in the hall mirror. "You look like yourself," Samuel replied, "just clean and warm." He'd planned to set up a temporary bed in the spare room, but Maya seemed anxious about being alone. Instead, he arranged blankets on the living room couch, where she could see him moving about the house. She curled up like a small animal, watching his every movement with alert attention. As afternoon wore into evening, Maya began to relax enough to talk more freely. She told him about her mother, a young woman who'd struggled with addiction but who had loved her daughter in her lucid moments. She described hiding in closets when strange men came to their apartment, being left with neighbors for days at a time, the confusion and fear when police officers and social workers started appearing in their lives. "Mama used to sing to me," Maya said drowsily as the sun set outside Samuel's windows. "She said angels would watch over me when she couldn't." Samuel settled into his reading chair, Martha's Bible open on his lap, though he wasn't really reading. Instead, he watched this broken child begin to trust enough to close her eyes. When she finally fell asleep, he covered her more carefully with the quilt and sat in the growing darkness, thinking. A soft knock at the kitchen door interrupted his contemplation. Samuel's heart jumped. Had someone already discovered Maya's presence? But when he opened the door, he found Ruth Byler standing on his porch, holding a covered dish. "I brought you some of my beef stew," Ruth said, stepping inside without invitation, as was her way. "You've been looking too thin lately," and she stopped mid-sentence as her eyes fell on the sleeping child on Samuel's couch. The two adults stared at each other across the room, Maya's peaceful breathing the only sound between them. Ruth's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and dawning alarm. "Samuel Yoder, what in heaven's name—" "Shh," Samuel whispered, gesturing toward the kitchen. Ruth followed, her eyes never leaving the sleeping child. In the kitchen, with the door closed between them and Maya, Ruth turned to face Samuel with an expression he'd never seen before. Part concern, part fear, part something approaching anger. "Who is that child?" she whispered urgently. Samuel found himself explaining the morning's events, watching Ruth's face grow more troubled with each detail. When he finished, she sat heavily in one of his kitchen chairs, her hands pressed to her temples. "Samuel, you can't, this isn't—" Ruth struggled for words. "You have to call the authorities immediately, tonight." "She's been failed by the authorities, Ruth. She was living on the streets, digging through garbage." "That's not your responsibility," Ruth interrupted, though her voice held less conviction than her words. "We don't involve ourselves in English problems. You know this." Samuel leaned against the counter, suddenly feeling every one of his 52 years. "Since when is a hungry child an English problem? Since when do we turn away from those in need?" Ruth's expression softened slightly. "You know I don't mean it that way. But Samuel, think about what you're doing. Harboring a runaway child, there are laws, procedures. The bishop preaches about loving our neighbors as ourselves every Sunday," Samuel said quietly. "How is turning away a hungry child living that love?" They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling between them. Ruth had been Martha's dearest friend, had helped Samuel through the darkest days after his wife's death. Her concern came from genuine care, not judgment. "What will you do?" Ruth asked finally. Samuel looked through the kitchen doorway toward the living room where Maya slept. In the lamplight, she looked even smaller, more vulnerable. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't put her back on the streets." Ruth studied his face, seeing something there that made her sigh deeply. "This will cause problems, Samuel. Big problems. I know. The community won't understand. They'll say you're getting too involved with worldly matters. I know that too." Ruth gathered her shawl around her shoulders, preparing to leave. At the door, she turned back. "I won't say anything tonight. But Samuel, you need to figure this out quickly. A secret like this won't keep long in a community our size." After Ruth left, Samuel returned to his chair near the couch. Maya had shifted in her sleep, one small hand clutching the edge of Martha's quilt. In the lamplight, he could see old bruises fading on her arms, the hollow look that spoke of too many missed meals, the way she even in sleep seemed ready to flee at the first sign of danger. Tomorrow would bring difficult questions, impossible choices, and consequences he couldn't predict. His community expected certain behaviors, the law demanded others, and his faith called him to something that might conflict with both. But tonight, a hungry child was warm and fed and safe. Sometimes, Samuel thought, that had to be enough to start with. Maya's drawings scattered across Samuel's kitchen table, like windows into a world he'd never imagined a child should know. Drawn in crayon on paper he'd found in Martha's old sewing box, they showed a progression of memories that made Samuel's heart ache with each careful stroke. The first drawing showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a smiling sun. "That's me and Mama when she was good," Maya had explained matter-of-factly as she worked, before the bad medicine made her sick. The second drawing was darker, literally and figuratively. The same two figures stood in what looked like a room, but the tall one was lying down, while the small one stood nearby. Dark scribbles filled the corners. "Mama sleeping too much," Maya had said quietly. "I got hungry, but couldn't wake her up." Samuel had stopped looking at the drawings after that, focusing instead on teaching Maya how to gather eggs from the chicken coop and fill the horses' water troughs. Physical activity seemed to help her, the simple, repetitive motions of farm chores providing structure that had been missing from her chaotic life. It had been 3 days since he'd brought her home, and Samuel had developed a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Maya woke before dawn, as farm children learned to do, and helped with the morning chores. Her small hands weren't strong enough for heavy work, but she could scatter feed for the chickens, collect eggs carefully in a basket, and brush the gentler horses with intense concentration. "Why don't your horses have names?" she asked on the second morning, running her hand along the mare's neck. Samuel paused in his milking. In Amish tradition, working animals weren't typically given names. They were tools, not pets. But looking at Maya's expectant face, the explanation seemed unnecessarily harsh. "What would you call her?" Maya studied the brown and white mare thoughtfully. "Hope. She looks like a hope." And so the mare became Hope, followed by Courage for the gelding, and Faith for the oldest horse. Samuel found himself using the names naturally, and noticed that Maya's connection to the animals seemed to calm something anxious inside her. The barn loft had become Maya's special refuge during the day. Samuel had arranged some old furniture. Up there, a comfortable chair, a small table, some of Martha's books that had pictures. When Bishop Miller or other community members stopped by unexpectedly, Maya knew to climb the ladder and stay quiet until they left. It was during one of these hiding sessions that Samuel discovered just how observant Maya had become about their world. Bishop Miller had arrived unannounced to discuss the upcoming Harvest Thanksgiving service, and Maya had vanished up the ladder so quickly Samuel hardly saw her move. "You seem distracted lately, Brother Samuel," Bishop Miller observed, settling his considerable frame into Samuel's kitchen chair. "Ruth Byler mentioned she's concerned about your spirits." Samuel forced himself to focus on the conversation, discussing hymn selections and service logistics, while part of his mind worried about Maya staying quiet above them. The bishop's visit stretched longer than usual, and Samuel found himself growing anxious about the little girl hidden in his barn. When Bishop Miller finally left, Samuel hurried to the loft. He found Maya sitting perfectly still in the old chair, her hands folded in her lap like a miniature adult. "I heard him talking about God," she said without preamble. "He sounds different from how you talk about God." Samuel settled onto a hay bale across from her. "What do you mean?" Maya's brow furrowed in concentration. "When you pray before we eat, you sound like you're talking to someone you know. Like when I used to talk to Mama when she was happy. But the big man, he sounds like he's mad at God or scared of him." The observation was so astute it left Samuel momentarily speechless. Maya had detected something in Bishop Miller's tone that Samuel had noticed but never articulated, a certain rigidity, a fearfulness about stepping outside prescribed boundaries. "Different people have different ways of talking to God," Samuel said carefully. "What matters is that they're trying to listen." "Do you think God minds that I'm here?" Maya asked quietly. The question pierced Samuel's heart. "Oh, sweetheart, no. God loves children especially. The Bible tells us that Jesus said, 'The kingdom of heaven belongs to children like you.'" Maya nodded solemnly, processing this information. "Then why do I have to hide when the big man comes?" Samuel struggled for an answer that wouldn't frighten her or destroy her growing trust. Sometimes people need time to understand new things. They're not bad people, but they worry about doing the right thing. That evening, as Maya helped him prepare a simple supper, she asked another question that cut to the heart of his dilemma. "When will I be able to stop hiding?" Samuel paused in his vegetable chopping, the question he'd been avoiding, the one that kept him awake at night, had been asked with the straightforward honesty only a child could manage. He didn't have an answer, not yet. "I'm working on that," he said finally. "But I need you to know that no matter what happens, I won't let you go back to being hungry or scared or alone." Maya nodded with the gravity of someone far older than her 7 years. "I know, you're not like the other grown-ups who made promises they couldn't keep." That night, after Maya fell asleep on her makeshift bed in the living room, Samuel sat at his kitchen table with a notebook and pen. The legal research he'd been doing in secret trips to the public library had painted a complex picture. Maya's situation was more complicated than a simple case of abandonment or neglect. Her mother's death, the failed foster placement, her flight from the system, all of it created a tangle of legal and social service issues that wouldn't be easily resolved. He'd learned about kinship care, about emergency custody procedures, about the rights of children in the system. But every avenue seemed to lead back to the same conclusion. He would need to work within official channels, which meant revealing Maya's presence and risking her removal to another placement that might fail her again. Samuel found himself writing, not legal notes, but a letter to Martha, as he had so many times since her death. He wrote about Maya's drawings, about her naming the horses, about the way she'd absorbed his explanation of God's love with the desperate hunger of someone starving for affection. "I don't know what you'd do in this situation," he wrote, "but I think you'd tell me to stop overthinking and start trusting. You always said love was meant to be lived, not analyzed." As if summoned by his thoughts of Martha, Maya stirred on the couch. Samuel went to check on her and found her caught in what was clearly a nightmare, whimpering and moving restlessly. "Maya, sweetheart, you're safe," he whispered, gently touching her shoulder. Her eyes flew open, wide with panic, until she focused on his face. "Samuel," she whispered, using his name for the first time. "I'm here. You're safe." She sat up, reaching for the comfort of his presence. Without thinking, Samuel gathered her into his arms, feeling her small body tremble with the aftermath of whatever fear had visited her dreams. "I dreamed Mama was calling me, but I couldn't find her," Maya whispered against his shoulder. Samuel held her until the trembling stopped, until her breathing deepened again into sleep. As he tucked her back under Martha's quilt, he realized that somewhere in the past 3 days, this broken child had become something more than a responsibility. She had become his to protect. The unsigned letter arrived on Samuel's kitchen table like a serpent in Eden, its harsh words written in careful script that revealed nothing about its author's identity, but everything about the community's growing unease. "Brother Samuel," it began, "it has come to our attention that you may be harboring an English child in your home. This goes against our ways and brings unwanted attention to our community. The proper authorities should handle worldly matters. A concerned member." Samuel read the letter 3 times, his coffee growing cold as Maya played quietly with the barn cats outside his kitchen window. The sight of her, hair braided in the simple style Martha used to favor, wearing one of his daughter's old dresses, laughing as a kitten pounced on her shoelaces, seemed to mock the letter's cold assessment. Ruth Byler had kept her word about staying silent, but secrets in a community of 300 people were like water in cupped hands. Eventually, they found a way to leak through. Samuel had noticed the subtle changes. Conversations that stopped when he approached, meaningful glances exchanged between neighbors, a certain stiffness in greetings that hadn't been there before. The breaking point had come 2 days earlier, when Maya, grown comfortable with farm life, had wandered too close to the property line while chasing one of the barn cats. The Stoltzfus children, 3 little ones playing in their yard next door, had spotted her and called out friendly hellos. Maya, starved for companionship with children her own age, had approached the fence to talk with them. Samuel had found them 20 minutes later, Maya kneeling in the grass while 6-year-old Rebecca Stoltzfus braided dandelion stems into her hair, and 8-year-old Joshua showed her how to whistle through a blade of grass. The scene was innocent, joyful, exactly what childhood should look like, but when Mary Stoltzfus discovered the impromptu play date, her reaction had been swift and telling. She'd gathered her children with sharp words about staying on their own. Property, shooting Samuel a look that mixed disappointment with something approaching fear. The message was clear. His secret was out, and not everyone approved. Now, staring at the anonymous letter, Samuel felt the weight of his isolation settling heavier on his shoulders. The community that had supported him through Martha's illness and death, that had rallied around him in his grief, was pulling away because he'd chosen to help a hungry child. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Samuel quickly tucked the letter into his Bible and called out to Maya, "Barn loft, sweetheart, company." Maya disappeared with the practiced efficiency she'd developed over the past week. Samuel watched her climb the ladder with mixed pride and sorrow. No 7-year-old should be that skilled at becoming invisible. Bishop Miller stood on the porch, his expression more serious than usual. Behind him, Samuel was surprised to see Deacon Jonas Fisher and Elder Abraham Lapp. 3 of the Community's leadership. This wasn't a casual visit. "Samuel," Bishop Miller said gravely, "we need to talk." They settled around Samuel's kitchen table, the same table where Maya had eaten her first real meal in days, where she'd drawn her heartbreaking pictures, where Samuel had wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. The presence of these men, good men who'd been his friends for decades, suddenly felt intrusive. "There are concerns in the community," Bishop Miller began carefully, "about your recent behavior. Reports of unusual activities, secretive actions that don't align with our ways." Samuel met each man's eyes in turn. Jonas Fisher, whose own children he'd helped deliver hay during a difficult harvest. Abraham Lapp, who'd wept openly at Martha's a funeral and praised Samuel's faithfulness. These weren't enemies. They were brothers in faith who were struggling to understand. "What activities concern you?" Samuel asked evenly. Elder Lapp shifted uncomfortably. "Samuel, we know there's a child, an English child, in your home." The words hung in the air like smoke. Samuel felt a moment of panic, not for himself, but for Maya, hidden above them and probably listening to every word through the old floorboards. "And if there is," Samuel asked quietly. Bishop Miller's face showed genuine pain. "Brother, you know our position on involving ourselves too deeply in worldly affairs. We help our own. We show Christian charity when appropriate, but we don't take on responsibilities that belong to English authorities. Since when is feeding a hungry child too worldly?" Samuel's voice remained calm, but he felt anger building in his chest. "Since when is showing mercy to a little one in need against our faith?" Deacon Fisher leaned forward. "It's not about the act of kindness, Samuel. It's about the implications. You're breaking English laws by not reporting her. You're exposing our community to government scrutiny. You're acting outside proper channels." "The proper channels failed her," Samuel replied. "She was living on the streets, digging through garbage for food. The system that was supposed to protect her had abandoned her to fend for herself." "That's not your responsibility," Bishop Miller said gently but firmly. "We can't save every English child who faces hardship. We have our own community to consider." Samuel stood up slowly, his hands flat on the table. "I seem to remember a story about a good Samaritan who helped someone from outside his community. I recall our Savior saying we should become like little children to enter heaven. When did we decide those teachings don't apply to actual children?" The three men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Elder Lapp spoke carefully. "Samuel, no one questions your good heart, but you're allowing emotion to cloud your judgment. This child has family somewhere, proper services to care for her. By keeping her here, you're preventing her from receiving appropriate help." "I've seen the appropriate help," Samuel said, his voice growing stronger. "Foster homes that reject children for having nightmares about dead mothers. Systems that lose track of 7-year-olds who end up homeless and starving. If that's appropriate, then perhaps our definition of the word needs examination." Bishop Miller stood as well, his considerable presence filling the kitchen. "Samuel, as your bishop, I'm directing you to contact the authorities today. This situation needs to be resolved properly through official channels. And if I refuse," the question created a silence that stretched between them like a chasm. In Amish communities, refusal to obey the bishop's direction was grounds for serious discipline, potentially including excommunication. "Then we'll have to consider your standing in the community," Bishop Miller said sadly. "Samuel, don't force us down that path. We're your brothers. We want what's best for you." After they left, Samuel climbed to the barn loft, where he found Maya sitting very still in the old chair, tears streaming down her face. "They want you to send me away," she whispered. Samuel knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his weathered ones. "Maya, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I made you a promise that I wouldn't let you be hungry or scared or alone again. I'm going to keep that promise, no matter what." But the big man said, The big man is a good person who's trying to do what he thinks is right, but sometimes good people can be wrong about what right means. Samuel smoothed her hair back from her face. Do you trust me? Maya nodded solemnly. Then trust that I'll figure this out. We'll figure it out together. That evening, as Samuel tucked Maya into her makeshift bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. If I have to go away, will you forget about me? Samuel knelt beside the couch, his heart breaking at the resignation in her voice. As if abandonment was inevitable, as if adults always eventually failed the children who depended on them. Maya, look at me. He waited until her eyes met his. I will never, ever forget you. You've become part of my heart, part of my family. Nothing will change that. But as he sat in his kitchen late that night, the anonymous letter spread before him alongside the Bible he'd been trying to find guidance in. Samuel wondered if love would be enough to overcome a community's fear of change. The missing child poster appeared on the bulletin board at Miller's General Store on a grey Tuesday morning. Maya's school photograph staring out from beneath a word missing in bold black letters. Samuel stood frozen in front of it, his weekly shopping list forgotten in his trembling hand. Maya Johnson, age 7, the poster read, last seen at Riverside Foster Home 2 weeks ago, considered endangered due to age and circumstances. Please contact Pennsylvania State Police or Child Protective Services with any information. The photograph showed a different Maya than the one Samuel had come to know. This Maya looked hollow-eyed and wary, her smile forced for the camera. The child, sleeping peacefully in his living room, who laughed at the antics of barn kittens and named his horses with such care, seemed like a different person entirely. Tragic situation, said a voice behind him. Samuel turned to find English. Neighbor Tom Bradley reading over his shoulder. Little girl went missing from foster care couple weeks back. Police think she might be hiding somewhere around here. Found evidence she'd been staying near the truck stop. Samuel's mouth went dry. Any leads? Tom shook his head. Poor kid's probably scared out of her mind. Foster mother said she'd been having trouble adjusting, lots of nightmares and such. Can't imagine what goes through a child's head in a situation like that. Later that afternoon, while Maya played in the barn loft, Samuel drove his buggy to the public library in Millfield. The English librarian, Mrs. Patterson, had grown accustomed to his visits over the past week as he researched child custody laws and family services procedures. More legal research, Mr. Yoder? She asked kindly, pulling several books from behind. The circulation desk. She'd been discreetly helping him navigate the complex maze of family court procedures, perhaps sensing the urgency behind his quiet questions. I'm trying to understand the process for kinship care, Samuel said carefully. If a child had relatives who could provide a stable home, Mrs. Patterson's eyes showed understanding. It's complicated, especially when the child is already in the system. But kinship placements are generally preferred over foster care with strangers, assuming the relatives can pass background checks and home studies. She pulled out several pamphlets from a filing cabinet. There are procedures for emergency custody, temporary guardianship, permanent placement. But Mr. Yoder, she lowered her voice. If this is about the missing child, whose poster is all over town, you need to know that hiding her, even with the best intentions, could make the legal situation much more difficult. Samuel absorbed this information with growing dread. Every day he waited made his situation more legally precarious, but every day also allowed Maya to heal a little more from the traumas she'd experienced. The conflict between protecting her, emotional well-being, and following legal procedures seemed impossible to resolve. On his way home, Samuel stopped at the payphone outside the post office. He'd memorized the number from the missing child poster, though he wasn't sure what he intended to say. His hand trembled as he lifted the receiver, then slowly set it back down. One call would end everything. Maya's fragile sense of security, his growing attachment to the child who'd filled the empty spaces in his home and heart. But not calling meant living with the constant fear of discovery, the growing pressure from his community, and the knowledge that somewhere officials were searching for Maya with increasing urgency. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah Stoltzfus, the elderly widow who lived 3 farms over, knocked on Samuel's door as the sun was setting. At 78, Sarah was one of the community's most respected members, known for her wisdom and her ability to see through pretense to the heart of matters. "Samuel Yoder," she said without preamble as she stepped into his kitchen, "I've come to meet this child who has the entire community in such an uproar." Samuel's heart raced. Sarah's directness was legendary, but so was her compassion. If anyone might understand his dilemma, it would be Sarah. "Maya," he called softly, "could you come down, please? I'd like you to meet someone." Maya appeared at the kitchen doorway, staying close to the wall as she'd learned to do when strangers were present. Sarah studied her with the keen eyes of someone who'd raised 7 children and helped deliver countless others into the world. "Come here, child," Sarah said gently, settling her arthritic frame into one of Samuel's kitchen chairs. "I won't hurt you." Maya approached cautiously, stopping just within arm's reach. Sarah reached out slowly, taking the little girl's chin in her weathered hand and studying her face with the intensity of someone reading an important document. "You've been through some hard times," Sarah said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "But you're safe here with Samuel, aren't you?" Maya nodded solemnly. "He doesn't let me be hungry. And he prays for my mama every night, even though she went to heaven." Sarah's eyes flickered to Samuel, then back to Maya. "What do you think about our way of life here? Our plain clothes? Our simple ways?" "I like it," Maya said with surprising firmness. "Everything's quiet and peaceful. The horses like me, and Samuel teaches me about God being love instead of being scary." Sarah spent the next hour with Maya, asking gentle questions about her life, her dreams, her understanding of the world she'd found herself in. Samuel watched in amazement as Maya opened up to this elderly woman in ways she hadn't even with him, describing her mother's struggles, her fear of being sent away again, her growing attachment to farm life. After Maya had been tucked into bed, Sarah remained at Samuel's kitchen table, her hands folded over the handle of her walking stick. "That child belongs here," she said simply. "I've seen enough children in my life to recognize one who's found her place." "The bishop disagrees," Samuel said wearily. "The community disagrees." Sarah snorted, a sound Samuel had never heard from the dignified elderly woman. "The bishop is a good man, but he's forgotten that our faith is supposed to be living and breathing, not a set of rules carved in stone. As for the community, half of them are scared of change, and the other half are scared of standing out from their neighbors." She studied Samuel with the same intensity she'd focused on Maya. "The question is, Samuel Yoder, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to let fear, theirs or your own, dictate how you respond to God's call to love this child?" "It's not that simple, Sarah. There are legal issues, community pressure, the bishop's direct orders." "Far." Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Legal issues can be resolved if you approach them honestly. Community pressure passes. Even bishops can be educated if they're presented with the right arguments from the right people." She struggled to her feet, leaning heavily on her walking stick. "But that little girl upstairs, her need for love and stability and a sense of belonging, that won't wait for you to solve all the other problems." At the door, Sarah turned back. "I'll be talking to some people, Samuel. People who remember what it felt like to be outsiders, to need community acceptance themselves. Your Maya may have more support than you realize." After she left, Samuel sat at his kitchen table staring at the missing child poster he'd taken from the store. Maya's haunted school photograph stared back at him, a reminder of what she'd been before she'd found her way to his farm. Tomorrow, he decided, he would make the call, but he would do it on his terms, with legal representation and a plan for keeping Maya safe. Mrs. Patterson had given him the name of a lawyer who specialized in family cases, someone who might be able to navigate the system without destroying the fragile trust Maya had placed in him. The poster crinkled as Samuel folded it carefully and tucked it into his Bible. Soon, the whole world would know where Maya Johnson had been hiding. The only question remaining was whether love would be enough to keep her where she belonged. The worn children's Bible had belonged to Martha as a little girl, its pages soft with years of handling, and its margins filled with careful notes in her childhood handwriting. Samuel found Maya studying it one morning, her finger tracing the colorful illustrations with reverent attention. "This lady looks like she was kind," Maya said, pointing to a picture of Mary holding the infant Jesus. "Like your Martha must have been." Samuel settled beside her on the couch, touched by her instinctive understanding. "Martha was very kind. She would have loved you very much." Maya turned the page to a picture of Jesus surrounded by children. "He looks happy with the kids, not like some grown-ups who get mad when children ask too many questions." The simple observation pierced Samuel's heart. How many adults had failed this child before she'd learned to expect impatience instead of welcome? Jesus loved children especially. He said we all need to become more like children to understand God's love. What does that mean? Samuel thought carefully, wanting to give her an answer she could understand. Children trust easily, love without conditions, forgive quickly. They ask honest questions and believe in possibilities. Maybe Jesus meant we should approach God and each other with that same openness. Maya nodded solemnly, as if filing away this wisdom for later consideration. "Is that why you helped me? Because of being like a child?" "Maybe," Samuel admitted. "When I saw you by that dumpster, I didn't think about rules or complications. I just saw someone who needed help." The conversation was interrupted by voices outside, multiple voices, which was unusual for Samuel's typically quiet farm. Through the window, he saw several buggies in his yard and a group of Amish women approaching his door. Maya quickly closed the Bible and headed for her hiding place, but Samuel caught her arm gently. "Wait," he said, making a decision that surprised himself. "I think it's time you met some people properly." Maya's eyes widened with fear and confusion, but she trusted him enough to stay as Sarah Stoltzfus led a group of 5 women into Samuel's kitchen. Behind Sarah came Rebecca Miller, the bishop's own wife, along with Ruth Byler, Mary Stoltzfus, and Anna Fisher. The women arranged themselves around Samuel's kitchen table with the efficiency of those who'd organized countless community meals and work days. Maya pressed close to Samuel's side, overwhelmed by the sudden presence of so many adults who'd been mysterious figures glimpsed from hiding places. "Ladies," Samuel said carefully, "this is Maya. Maya, these are some of the women from our community." Sarah Stoltzfus smiled warmly at the child. "Hello again, Maya. I've told these ladies about our conversation the other evening, and they wanted to meet you themselves." Rebecca Miller, a gentlewoman who'd always been more progressive than her husband, knelt to Maya's eye level. "We brought you something, child." She pulled a small package from her bag, wrapped in plain brown paper. Maya looked to Samuel for permission before accepting the gift. Inside was a simple Amish doll, made from cloth scraps in the traditional faceless style that emphasized character over appearance. "I made her myself," Rebecca said softly. "Every little girl should have a doll to love and care for." Maya clutched the doll against her chest, tears forming in her eyes. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "That's for you to decide," Rebecca replied. "Names are important things. They should come from the heart." Mary Stoltzfus, who'd been so stern about her children's interaction with Maya, surprised everyone by speaking next. "My children have been asking about you every day." They want to know when they can play with you properly without having to pretend it's a secret. Maya looked up at Samuel with hopeful eyes. The isolation, necessary as it had been, was taking its toll on a child who craved normal social interaction. Anna Fisher reached into her own bag and pulled out a small dress, clearly handmade. "I thought you might like something that fits properly. Samuel mentioned you're about the same size as my granddaughter." The dress was beautiful in its simplicity, dark blue fabric with careful stitching, modest but perfectly suited to a little girl. Maya ran her fingers over the smooth material with wonder. "Why are you being so nice to me?" Maya asked, with the directness that only children possess. "The men who came before seemed angry that I was here." The women exchanged glances, and Ruth Wheeler answered honestly, "Sometimes it takes time for people to understand what God is calling them to do. We were scared of change, scared of getting involved in complicated situations, but fear isn't a good reason to turn away from a child who needs love." Sarah Stoltzfus nodded approvingly. "Besides, you've been good for Samuel. He's been too alone since Martha passed, and having you here has brought some light back to his eyes." The conversation that followed surprised Samuel with its warmth and acceptance. Maya, initially shy, began to open up as the women asked gentle questions about her interests, her experiences on the farm, her understanding of their way of life. "Do you miss your mother?" Rebecca Miller asked sensitively. Maya nodded, her small hand still clutching the doll. "Every day. But Samuel says she's in heaven now, and that she'd want me to be safe and happy. I think she'd like it here. It's peaceful and people pray for her. Would you like to learn more about our ways?" Mary Stoltzfus asked. "About how we worship, how we live as a community." "Samuel's been teaching me," Maya replied, "about God being love, and about helping each other, and about taking care of the land and the animals. I like it better than the angry God some people talked about in the other places I lived." After the women left, promising to return soon and extending invitations for Maya to visit their families properly, Samuel found himself amazed at the transformation. These women, mothers and grandmothers who understood the protective instincts that drove his actions, had seen past community expectations to recognize a child's fundamental need for belonging. That evening, as Maya played with her new doll and tried on her new dress, Samuel reflected on how hearts could change when people allowed themselves to see with compassion rather than fear. "Samuel," Maya said as he tucked her in for the night, "am I really going to be able to stay?" "Those ladies seem to think so." Samuel smoothed her hair back from her face, marveling at how much healthier she looked after 2 weeks of regular meals and peaceful sleep. "I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen, sweetheart. And it looks like we have more help." And then I realized. Maya hugged her new doll close. "I named her Hope, like your horse." "That's a perfect name," Samuel said, understanding the deeper meaning behind her choice. Hope for a future where she belonged, where love was stronger than fear, where a community could grow large enough to embrace a child who needed them. As Samuel sat in his kitchen that night, he found himself writing another letter to Martha, telling her about the women who'd opened their hearts to Maya, about the quiet revolution happening in their community as people chose compassion over comfort. Change was coming to Willow Creek. One opened heart at a time. The old family photograph had been tucked away in Martha's jewelry box for 30 years, forgotten beneath layers of tissue paper and memories. Samuel discovered it by accident while searching for Martha's pearl earrings, the ones he wanted to give Maya for her 8th birthday, still months away, but already on his mind. The black and white image showed a young Amish couple on their wedding day, surrounded by family members. Samuel recognized his late father-in-law immediately, standing proud and stern beside his daughter Martha. But it was the face beside Martha that made Samuel's breath catch, a younger girl, perhaps 16, with eyes that seemed eerily familiar. "Rachel," he whispered, remembering Martha's younger sister who'd left the community when Samuel was courting Martha. Rachel had been the rebellious one, questioning everything, chafing against the restrictions of Amish life. She'd vanished one night when Samuel was 24, leaving behind only a note saying she needed to find her own path. Samuel carried the photograph to the kitchen window, studying it in better light. The resemblance was unmistakable now. Maya had Rachel's eyes, the same stubborn set to her chin, even the same way of tilting her head when deep in thought. "Maya," Samuel called softly, his voice trembling. "Could you come here, please?" Maya appeared from the living room where she'd been reading Martha's old children's Bible, now her constant companion. She approached Samuel with the easy trust that had developed between them over the past 3 weeks. "I want to show you something," Samuel said, kneeling to her level. "This is a picture of my wife Martha on her wedding day. Do you see the young girl standing next to her?" Maya studied the photograph with intense concentration. "She looks like me," she said quietly. Around the eyes. Samuel's heart pounded as he prepared to ask the question that could change everything. "Maya, what was your mother's full name? Her name before she was married?" Maya's brow furrowed. "Mama said her real name was Rachel. Rachel, something with an S. She never talked much about before I was born. Said it made her too sad." "Stoltzfus," Samuel whispered, the pieces falling into place with devastating clarity. Rachel Stoltzfus. Maya looked up at him with eyes that suddenly seemed even more familiar. "That's it? How did you know?" Samuel sank into his kitchen chair, the photograph trembling in his hands. Rachel, Martha's beloved younger sister, had been Maya's mother, the sister they'd mourned as lost to the English world, the one Martha had cried for in private moments, wondering if she was safe, if she was happy, if they'd ever see her again. Maya was family. Not just a child Samuel had rescued, but Martha's own niece, his sister-in-law's daughter, the child they'd prayed for, worried about, never knowing where to find her or how to help. "Maya," Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion, "your mother was Martha's sister. You're my family, my wife's family. You belong here not just because I love you, but because this is truly your home." Maya stared at him with wide eyes, processing this revelation. "Mama was Amish?" "Yes, sweetheart. She grew up right here in Willow Creek, in this community." She was Martha's little sister, and Martha loved her very much. Tears began streaming down Maya's face, not tears of sadness, but of something approaching wonder. "She used to sing me songs sometimes when she wasn't sick, strange songs I never heard anywhere else, and she knew things about farms and animals, but she never said why." Samuel gathered Maya into his arms, feeling the weight of 30 years of family grief begin to transform into something approaching joy. Rachel was gone, lost to the addiction that had claimed too many young lives, but her daughter, their daughter, was here, safe, finally home. "Tell me about the songs," Samuel said gently. Maya's voice was muffled against his shoulder. One was about a valley where peaceful waters flow. Another was about gathering in the morning light. She sang them when I was scared, said they were from a place she used to know where people took care of each other. Samuel recognized the hymns immediately. Traditional Amish songs Rachel would have learned as a child, carried with her through all the years of running from her past. Even in her darkest moments, she'd shared pieces of home with her daughter. That afternoon, while Maya played with the barn cats outside, Samuel walked to the small family cemetery on the hill behind his, a house. Martha's grave was marked with a simple stone, as was Amish custom. He knelt beside it, placing the old photograph against the headstone. "She came home, Martha," he whispered to the wind. "Rachel's daughter came home to us. She has your sister's eyes and your gentle heart. She's been healing here, learning to trust again. And now I understand why God brought her to me. She was..." Never a stranger I was helping. She was family finding her way back to where she belongs. When Maya joined him at the gravesite, drawn by some instinct she couldn't name, Samuel showed her Martha's headstone and told her about the aunt she'd never known, the woman who'd cried for her lost sister, who'd kept Rachel's photograph all these years, who would have loved Maya beyond measure. Is this why I felt safe? Here from the very beginning, Maya asked, kneeling beside the grave with natural reverence. Because some part of me remembered? Maybe, Samuel said. Sometimes our hearts know things our minds haven't figured out yet. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Bishop Miller arrived just as Samuel was preparing supper, his expression more troubled than angry. Samuel invited him in, making no attempt to hide Maya this time. Samuel, the bishop began heavily, I've been thinking about our last conversation, praying about the right path forward. I came to talk more about this situation. He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fell on Maya, who was setting the table with careful precision. Bishop Miller, Samuel said formally, I'd like you to meet Maya. Maya, this is Bishop Miller, the leader of our church community. Maya approached the bishop with the respectful manner Samuel had taught her, her hands folded in front of her simple dress. Hello, sir. Samuel's told me about you. Bishop Miller studied the child with new attention, seeing her clearly for the first time rather than simply as a problem to be solved. Hello, child. You've been staying with Samuel. Yes, sir. He saved me when I was hungry and scared. He's taught me about God's love and how to care for animals and how to pray for people who've gone to heaven. The bishop's expression shifted. As he took in Maya's words, her demeanor, the obvious care Samuel had taken in nurturing both her physical and spiritual well-being. But it was when Maya smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her entire face, that Bishop Miller gasped audibly. Dear Lord, he whispered, you look just like Samuel. She's Rachel's daughter, Samuel confirmed quietly. Martha's niece. She's not just a child I'm helping, Eli. She's family coming home. Bishop Miller sank into a kitchen chair as the implications washed over him. Rachel Stoltzfus, the community's prodigal daughter, dead from addiction in the English world, but her child, alive and precious, sitting in Samuel Yoder's kitchen like the answer to 30 years of prayers. The conversation that followed lasted well into the evening, transforming from confrontation to planning as Bishop Miller began to understand that this wasn't about Samuel defying community standards, but about a family being reunited in ways none of them had expected. By the time the bishop left, promising to call an emergency meeting of the community's elders, Maya had gained something precious, not just acceptance, but belonging that went deeper than kindness or charity. She was Rachel's daughter, Martha's niece, and Samuel's child by choice and by blood. She was finally, truly home. Sarah's grandmother's quilt had been brought out for special occasions throughout 3 generations. Weddings, births, moments when the community needed reminding of the threads that bound them together. Now it draped across the long table in the miller's farmhouse, its intricate pattern of interlocking circles serving as a backdrop for the most important community meeting in decades. The quilt's colors had faded with age, but its craftsmanship remained evident in every careful stitch. Like the community itself, it had weathered storms and celebrations, tears and joy, holding together through the accumulated wisdom of hands that understood how separate pieces could become something beautiful when joined with love and patience. Samuel sat at one end of the table, Maya beside him in her new blue dress, her small hand clasped in his weathered one. Across from them, the community's elders arranged themselves with the gravity of those who understood they were making decisions that would echo through generations. Bishop Miller had called the emergency meeting for Sunday evening, after regular worship services and the traditional communal meal. Word had spread quickly through their small community. Samuel Yoder's English child was actually Rachel Stoltzfus's daughter, Martha's niece, family who'd been lost and was now found. The revelation had split the community's response into complex factions. Some saw divine providence in Maya's arrival, God's way of healing old wounds and bringing Rachel home through her daughter. Others worried about the legal complications, the government scrutiny that harboring a missing child had already attracted. Still others questioned whether blood relation changed the fundamental problem of getting too involved with English authorities and social systems. Elder Abraham Lapp spoke first, his lined face grave with concern. "Samuel, no one disputes that. This changes things, knowing the child's parentage. But we still have the matter of broken laws, missed procedures. The English authorities are actively searching for her. Police have been asking questions in town." Samuel had spent the week consulting with Rebecca Patterson, the English lawyer who specialized in family law. The legal situation was complex but not hopeless. Maya's status as a blood relative gave him standing to petition for kinship placement. But the weeks of hiding her presence had complicated matters significantly. "The lawyer believes we can work through the legal issues," Samuel replied carefully. "Maya's caseworker has agreed to meet with us tomorrow. If the community supports my petition for custody, she'll have advocates who can speak to her well-being and my fitness as a guardian." Deacon Jonas Fisher leaned forward. "And if they decide you're unfit, if they remove her anyway, we'll have involved ourselves in English legal proceedings for nothing, opened our community to scrutiny and judgment." Maya had remained silent throughout the first part of the discussion, but now she spoke with the directness Samuel had come to expect from her. "Sir, may I say something?" The adults turned to her with varying degrees of surprise. Children rarely spoke in formal community meetings, but Maya's unique situation warranted exceptions to normal protocol. "I've lived in the English world my whole life," Maya said, her young voice steady despite the weight of so many adult eyes upon her. "I lived with people who said they cared about me but sent me away when I cried at night. I lived in places where no one knew my name or remembered what I liked to eat or helped me when I had bad dreams about my mama." She paused, gathering her thoughts with the careful consideration Samuel had watched her develop over their weeks together. "But here, with Samuel, I learned what it feels like when someone loves you enough to keep you safe, even when it's hard. I learned that God isn't scary and angry, but gentle and kind. I learned that animals can trust you if you're patient, and that work feels good when you're helping someone you care about." Maya looked directly at Bishop Miller, her blue eyes, so like her mother Rachel's, clear and determined. "I don't know about laws and procedures and complications, but I know that before I came here, I was just surviving. Now I'm living. Isn't that what families are supposed to do for each other?" The silence that followed Maya's words stretched across the room like morning mist, touching every heart present. Sarah Stoltzfus was the first to speak, her aged voice carrying the authority of someone who'd witnessed decades of community decisions. "This child speaks truth that shames our worrying," she said firmly. "We talk about complications and procedures while she talks about love and belonging. We worry about government scrutiny while she shows us what faith looks like when it's lived." Instead of just disgust, Rebecca Miller, the bishop's wife, nodded her agreement. "I've spent time with Maya this past week. She's not a disruption to our way of life. She's a blessing we almost missed because we were too afraid to see clearly." But Elder Lapp remained unconvinced. "Sentiment doesn't change facts. The child has been reported as missing. The authorities will come, whether we cooperate or not. Are we prepared for the consequences of this decision?" As if summoned by his words, the sound of car engines approaching the farmhouse interrupted the meeting. Through the windows, They could see official vehicles pulling into the miller's yard, state police cars and a sedan that likely belonged to Child Protective Services. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs as he realized the moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than expected. Someone, perhaps responding to the missing child posters, perhaps following up on tips from English neighbors, had led the authorities directly to them. Maya instinctively pressed closer to Samuel, her small body trembling with the fear of abandonment that still haunted her despite weeks of security. "Are they going to take me away?" Samuel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, drawing strength from her trust, even as his own world seemed to tilt. "I don't know, sweetheart. But remember what? I promised you, no matter what happens, you'll always be loved, always be family." Bishop Miller stood slowly, his considerable presence filling the room. "Brothers and sisters, it seems the time for discussion has passed. The question now is simple. Do we stand together as a community supporting Samuel's right to care for his family, or do we step aside and let the English authorities handle this as they see fit?" The knock on the front door came sharp and official, not the gentle rap of neighbors or friends, but the insistent sound of legal authority. Bishop Miller nodded to Samuel. "This is your fight, brother, but you're not fighting it alone." Samuel rose from his chair, Maya's hand still clutched in his. As they walked toward the door, he felt the weight of the community's eyes upon them. The knowledge that whatever happened in the next few minutes would determine not just Maya's future, but the kind of people they chose to be when their faith was truly tested. The quilt remained spread across the table behind them, its interlocking circles catching the lamplight, a reminder that beautiful things could be created when separate pieces chose to support each other, to hold together through whatever storms might come. Outside, car doors slammed shut and official voices discussed procedures and protocols. Inside, a small girl who'd learned what love looked like, prepared to face a world that had failed her before, supported by a community that was still deciding whether they had the courage to redefine what family meant. Samuel paused with his hand on the door handle, offering a silent prayer for wisdom, for courage, and for the strength to protect the child who'd become his heart's greatest joy and deepest responsibility. Then he opened the door to face whatever consequences love demanded. Maya's handmade Amish dress had been sewn with love by Anna Fisher, each stitch carrying the hopes of a community learning to open their hearts. Now, as she stood beside Samuel, facing three stern-looking officials in the miller's farmhouse doorway, the simple blue fabric seemed to represent everything about belonging that couldn't be quantified in government reports. Detective Laura Harrison, a woman in her 40s with kind but tired eyes, spoke first. "Mr. Yoder, we have reason to believe you've been harboring Maya Johnson, a missing child who's been the subject of a statewide search. We need to speak with her immediately." Behind Detective Harrison stood Officer Mark Thompson and Mrs. Janet Rodriguez from Child Protective Services, their official presence filling the farmhouse entryway with the weight of legal authority and institutional power. Samuel felt Maya's small hand tighten in his, her body trembling with the familiar fear of adults who might make promises they couldn't keep. "Maya is safe and well cared for," Samuel said quietly. "She's not being harbored. She's been welcomed home." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her clipboard and official forms a stark contrast to the handmade furnishings surrounding them. "Mr. Yoder, regardless of your intentions, hiding a missing child is a serious matter. Maya needs to come with us now for a welfare check and proper placement procedures." "I won't go," Maya said suddenly, her young voice cutting through the adult conversation with surprising strength. "I won't go back to places where nobody knows my name or cares if I cry at night." Detective Harrison knelt to Maya's level, her expression softening as she took in the child's obvious health and cleanliness. The way she stood with confidence rather than the cowering wariness they'd expected to find. "Honey, we just want to make sure you're okay." Detective Harrison said gently. "You've been missing for weeks. People have been very worried about you." "Nobody was worried about me," Maya replied, with devastating honesty. "The foster lady was glad when I left because I was too much trouble. But Samuel worries about me every day. He makes sure I eat breakfast and says prayers for my mama and teaches me that God loves me even when bad things happen." Behind them, the Amish community members had quietly filed out of the kitchen to witness this confrontation. Bishop Miller stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Officers, I'm Bishop Eli Miller, the spiritual leader of this community. Before you take any action, I think you should understand the full situation." Mrs. Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Sir, this is a legal matter involving a missing child. Religious considerations don't override. This child is family," Bishop Miller interrupted with unusual firmness. "Maya is the daughter of Rachel Stoltzfus, a member of our community who left 30 years ago. She's Samuel's sister-in-law's daughter, his late wife's niece. She hasn't been kidnapped or harmed. She's been reunited with her blood relatives." Detective Harrison exchanged glances with her colleagues, clearly not expecting this development. "Mr. Yoder, is this true? You're related to Maya?" Samuel nodded, pulling the old family photograph from his pocket. Her mother was Martha's younger sister. "Maya has every right to be here with her family." As the photograph was passed between the officials, Maya spoke again, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My mama used to sing me songs from this place. She knew about farms and animals and taking care of each other. She told me stories about a peaceful valley where people loved God and helped their neighbors. I think part of her wanted to come home, but didn't know how." Sarah Stoltzfus stepped forward from the group of community members, her walking stick tapping against the wooden floor. "I knew Rachel as a child. This little one has her eyes, her stubborn spirit, her gentle heart. She belongs here with us." One by one, the community members began to speak, quietly, respectfully, but with growing conviction. Rebecca Miller talked about Maya's quick adaptation to their way of life. Mary Stoltzfus described how her own children had embraced Maya as a playmate and friend. Ruth Byler spoke of Samuel's transformation from isolated widower to devoted father figure. Mrs. Rodriguez listened to the testimonials with growing confusion. Her training had prepared her to find evidence of abuse or neglect, not a thriving child surrounded by an entire community willing to vouch for her well-being. "Maya," Detective Harrison said carefully, "are you saying you want to stay here with Mr. Yoder?" Maya nodded emphatically. "Samuel is my family now. This is where I belong. Please don't make me go back to being scared and hungry and alone." The simple plea, spoken with such earnest conviction by a 7-year-old who'd survived more trauma than most adults, seemed to shift something in the room's atmosphere. The officials found themselves facing not a case of child endangerment, but a community that had embraced a lost child and helped her heal. "We'll need to conduct interviews," Mrs. Rodriguez said finally, her tone less confrontational than before. "There are procedures, evaluations, legal requirements that must be met before any placement can be considered permanent." Samuel squeezed Maya's hand gently. "We understand. We want to do everything properly. Maya deserves the security of knowing her place here is legally protected." Bishop Miller stepped forward once more. "Officers, this community stands ready to cooperate fully with your investigation. We believe you'll find that Maya has been given excellent care and has flourished in Samuel's custody." As the officials began discussing next steps and scheduling formal interviews, Maya looked up at Samuel with eyes full of trust and hope. "They're not taking me away tonight," she whispered. Samuel knelt beside her, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. "No, sweetheart, tonight you sleep in your own bed, surrounded by people who love you. The battle wasn't over, but the first crucial stand had been taken. The new wooden toy horse had been carved by Samuel's own hands during the long evenings of waiting for official decisions, each careful cut of the knife carrying his hopes for Maya's future. Now it sat on the courthouse table between stacks of legal documents, a simple reminder of love in a room filled with bureaucratic complexity. 3 weeks had passed since the official's visit to the Miller farmhouse. 3 weeks of interviews, home studies, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings that would determine whether Maya Johnson could officially become Maya Yoder, Samuel's adopted daughter and Rachel's child, finally brought home. Judge Catherine Brennan, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and observant eyes, had presided over hundreds of custody cases in her career. But this case, an Amish widower seeking to adopt his late sister-in-law's daughter, was unlike anything she'd encountered before. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Judge Brennan addressed the caseworker, "please summarize your findings regarding Maya's placement with Samuel Yoder." Mrs. Rodriguez, whose initial skepticism had transformed into genuine admiration over the weeks of investigation, consulted her extensive notes. "Your Honor, in 23 years of child welfare work, I've rarely seen a placement that better. Serves a child's interests. Maya has thrived physically, emotionally, and developmentally in Samuel's care." She gestured to the thick file on her desk. "The psychological evaluation shows a child who's experienced significant trauma from her mother's death and previous unstable placements, but who's demonstrated remarkable resilience and healing in her current environment." Dr. Patricia Wells, the court-appointed psychologist, notes Maya's increased confidence, improved sleep patterns, and healthy attachment formation. Judge Brennan nodded. "And the community support?" "Extraordinary, Your Honor. I've conducted interviews with dozens of community members, and the consensus is overwhelming. Maya isn't seen as an outsider being helped. She's seen as family coming home. The Amish community has embraced her completely." Samuel sat at the petitioner's table with his lawyer, Rebecca Patterson, Maya beside him, in another dress lovingly sewn by the community women. Maya's small hands were folded in her lap, but her eyes were alert and unafraid as she listened to adults discuss her future. "Mr. Yoder," Judge Brennan addressed Samuel directly, "you've been caring for Maya for over a month now. Tell me, in your own words, what this adoption would mean to you." Samuel stood respectfully, his plain clothes and gentle demeanor a stark contrast to the formal courthouse setting. "Your Honor, when I found Maya by that dumpster, hungry and alone, I saw a child who needed help. I acted on instinct, on faith, on the belief that love should come before procedure." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But as the weeks passed, Maya became something more than a responsibility. She became my daughter in every way that matters. In my heart, in my home, in the way she's brought purpose back to my life after my wife's death." Samuel's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Martha and I always regretted losing touch with her sister, Rachel. We prayed for Rachel for 30 years, wondered if she was safe, if she was happy, if she'd ever come home. God answered those prayers, through Maya. Not by bringing Rachel back, but by bringing us her greatest gift, her beloved daughter." Judge Brennan turned her attention to Maya. "Maya, I know this is unusual, but I'd like to hear from you. Do you understand what adoption means?" Maya stood up with the careful dignity Samuel had taught her. "Yes, ma'am. It means Samuel becomes my real daddy forever, and I become his real daughter forever. It means I have a family that won't send me away if I have bad dreams or ask too many questions." "And that's what you want," Maya nodded emphatically. "Samuel taught me that God loves me and that I'm worth taking care of. He tells me stories about my mama when she was young and happy, before the bad medicine made her sick. He shows me pictures of Aunt Martha, who would have loved me if she was still alive. This is where I belong." The courtroom fell silent as Maya continued, her young voice carrying wisdom earned through hardship. In all the places I lived before, grown-ups made promises they couldn't keep. But Samuel keeps every promise. He promised I'd never be hungry again, and I haven't been. He promised I'd be safe, and I am. He promised I'd be loved, and I am. Bishop Miller, who'd traveled to the courthouse with several community members as witnesses, stood when Judge Brennan asked about the community's position. Your Honor, the Amish community of Willow Creek fully supports this adoption. Maya is Rachel's daughter, which makes her family by blood. But more than that, she's brought healing to our community, reminded us that faith is meant to be lived through acts of love, not just preserved through tradition. The judge's decision came after a brief recess for consideration. In all my years, on the bench, I've seen many children placed in homes where their basic needs are met, but their spirits remain wounded. Maya Johnson, soon to be Maya Yoder, has found something far more precious, a place where she's not just cared for, but truly belongs. Judge Brennan's gavel fell with finality. Adoption granted. As Samuel lifted Maya into his arms, both of them crying tears of joy, the wooden toy horse sat forgotten on the table, no longer a symbol of hope for the future, but a reminder of promises kept and love fulfilled. Maya was officially, legally, permanently home. The letter to Maya's mother's grave had been written on a quiet Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the adoption, Maya's careful handwriting filling the page with words meant for heaven. Samuel found her at the cemetery, kneeling beside the small headstone they'd placed next to Martha's, reading her letter aloud to the Pennsylvania wind. "Dear Mama," Maya's voice carried clearly in the still air, "I want you to know I'm okay now. More than okay, I'm happy. Samuel says you'd be proud of how I've learned to milk the cows and gather eggs without breaking any. I can braid Hope's mane now, and she lets me ride her around the pasture." Samuel approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt this sacred conversation between a daughter and her mother's memory. Maya had grown taller in their months together, her face fuller, her eyes bright with the confidence that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally. "I learned all the songs you used to sing to me," Maya continued reading. "Samuel says they're hymns from when you were little, from this place where I live now. Mrs. Stoltzfus taught me the harmony parts, and we sing them at church sometimes. When we do, I feel like you're singing with us." The community had embraced Maya's presence with a warmth that still amazed Samuel. What had begun as reluctant acceptance had blossomed into genuine love as Maya's gentle spirit and eager curiosity won heart after heart. She'd become the unofficial mascot of the church district, equally comfortable helping elderly Sarah Stoltzfus with her garden or playing tag with the youngest children after Sunday services. "Maya," Samuel said softly, settling on the grass beside her, "that's a beautiful letter." Maya looked up from the paper, her blue eyes, so like her mother Rachel's, shining with peaceful sadness rather than the desperate grief that had once consumed her. "I wanted Mama to know that her little girl found her way home, that the songs she sang and the stories she told led me to the right place." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the late afternoon sun paint the rolling hills in shades of gold and amber. The seasons had turned from winter's harsh edges to spring's gentle promise, to summer's full abundance, each change marking Maya's deeper integration into the rhythm of Amish life. "Samuel?" Maya asked, using the informal name she'd adopted once. "The adoption was finalized. Do you think God planned for me to find you, or was it just luck?" Samuel considered the question with the seriousness Maya's thoughtful nature deserved. "I think sometimes what looks like coincidence to us might be God's way of working in the world. You needed a family, and I needed someone to care for. You needed to learn about your mother's heritage, and I needed to understand that love doesn't always follow the rules we think it should." Maya nodded solemnly, then brightened. Mrs. Miller said, "I'm going to help with the new foster children who come to the county, the ones who need families but don't have anywhere to go yet." This was Maya's latest passion, working with Rebecca Miller and the County Social Services Department to create a bridge between the Amish community and children. In the foster system, not every child would be a good fit for their plain lifestyle, but some, like Maya had been, might thrive in the stability and simplicity of Amish family life. She says, "I can help because I know what it's like to be scared and not know if grown-ups will keep their promises," Maya continued, "and I know what it feels like when they do." The program was still in its early stages, but already 2 other children had been placed with Amish families. Temporary placements that allowed frightened children to experience love and stability while social workers searched for permanent solutions. Maya had appointed herself as their unofficial ambassador, helping them adjust to farm life and teaching them that being different didn't mean being unwanted. "I'm proud of you," Samuel said, meaning it deeply. "You've taken your own hard experiences and used them to help other children. That takes real courage." Maya leaned against Samuel's shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing after months of growing trust and affection. "I learned it from you. When you helped me, you didn't know if it would cause problems, or if I'd be grateful, or if anything good would come from it. But you did it anyway, because it was right." As they walked back toward the house, Maya chattering about her plans for helping the new foster children and her excitement about the upcoming harvest season, Samuel reflected on how profoundly their lives had changed. The lonely widower who'd found a hungry child by a dumpster had discovered that love multiplies rather than divides, that opening his heart to Maya had made room for more love, not less. The community had changed too. Bishop Miller preached now about the difference between preserving tradition and living faith, about how God sometimes called them to expand their understanding of family and neighbor. The narrow interpretations that had once seemed so important had given way to broader compassions, stronger testimonies of what it meant to follow Christ's example. That evening, as Samuel tucked Maya into her own bedroom, no longer the makeshift bed in the living room, but a proper child's room filled with handmade furniture and quilts from community members, she asked the question that had become their nightly ritual. "Tell me again about Aunt Martha, and how she would have loved me." Samuel settled into the chair beside her bed, the same chair where he'd once sat alone with his grief, now transformed into a place of bedtime stories and shared prayers. "Martha had the gentlest heart of anyone I've ever known. She cried when birds flew into windows, and she always kept extra food for unexpected visitors. If she'd lived to meet you, she would have spoiled you terribly with special cookies and extra story time." Maya smiled sleepily. "And she and Mama would have been friends again, the very best of friends. They would have sat up all night talking and laughing and planning adventures for you." As Maya drifted off to sleep, Samuel remained in the chair a few minutes longer, listening to her peaceful breathing and marveling at the mysterious ways love could heal old wounds and create new possibilities. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, more children to help, more hearts to open, more opportunities to live their faith through actions rather than words. But tonight, a little girl who'd once been hungry and homeless slept safely in her own bed, surrounded by a community that had learned to see family not as bloodlines or traditions, but as the choice to love unconditionally. The cycle of compassion continued, one opened heart at a time.